So if you've been paying attention to football media the last few days, a lot of platforms are telling you that Jalen Hurts is not a top 10 quarterback. On today's edition of Locked on Eagles, we're going to tell you why he is.
You are Locked on Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome on in, Eagles fans, to this Tuesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. I'm Louie DiBiase, joined as always by my co-host Gino Camilleri. On today's edition of Locked On Eagles, we're going to get into the ranking of Jalen Hurts, or the non-ranking, I should say. He's not been in a lot of these top 10 lists. We're going to tell you why he does belong on those lists. Plus, training camp is 1 week away. How many real starting battles is there going to be at practice? All that and more, what's more likely as well, coming your way. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use our code, which is in all capital letters, Locked On NFL, for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. So yeah, I mean, Gino, again, training camps are getting going this week. The Eagles start up next week. By the way, cannot wait. I'm a summer guy, but this year more than ever, I can always not wait for football, but I'm just so ready to get back to it this year, probably because of the end of last year, trying to just forget that. But we're still kind of in that dead zone a little bit at the end of it. A lot of lists are coming out for, top players, top 100 players. I've seen that from a lot of platforms. This week's been the top 10, I guess, and the theme has been top 10 quarterbacks. Our guys over at the Draft Dudes did one. ESPN came out with theirs, interviewing anonymous executives, GMs, scouts, coaches, you name it, across the NFL. And the theme has been that Jalen Hurts is not in the top 10. And I guess I get why. I think people have that recency bias. The last thing they saw from Jalen was a 5-game stretch that was just brutal. When all was failing, he was failing just as much as everybody else on his team. He could not elevate. And I think the whole country saw in that playoff game just how far back he and this team had fallen after that 10-1 start. But when you look at even that tough stretch of 5 games, if you contextualize those games, he only really had 3 really bad ones. It was the Seattle game on the road, it was on the road against the Giants, and then it was the playoff game against Tampa Bay. But because of 3 bad games, are we going to just remove everything else he did over these past 3.5 years? I'm not saying he's a top 5 quarterback right now, but I think it's crazy, especially some of these quarterbacks that are on these lists, to say he is not top 10 right now.
So it's an interesting time for Jalen Hurts, right? Because he is 2 seasons now removed from being in a Super Bowl, right? Yeah. So obviously that elevated him a bit. His stock was at its highest. People were putting them in the top 5. And
only one full season.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting to. Yeah, one full season, he's at that level, right? But the season before that, he was at a level that was about average, maybe a little bit below average.
Sure,
right?
Good point.
So that brings it about to, let's say, he's a 75 on Madden at that point, just to make it easy. Then the year after that, he has a season that kind of brings him back down to earth a little bit. But even that season is going to elevate his average because it was still above a 75, in my opinion. It's closer to one of the better quarterbacks in the league. And how you're looking at Jalen Hurts, you have to look at it through the lens of what he does for this football team overall. And is that a good enough player to have gotten it done over the last 3 years?
Yeah.
And averaging out all of those seasons together, does that one average season with 2 very good seasons, you can measure even one elite season, put him outside of the top 10?
Yeah, we're not saying top 5.
No.
I agree, Gino. And maybe people are thinking that stretch at the end showed you, maybe he's returning back to that median, right? Maybe he more is closer to the quarterback of 2021 than 2022, and 2023 was the middle ground. But then you'd be ignoring the 80% of the season last year where he was still a top 2, top 3 MVP candidate, according to betting odds, the vast majority of the season. That's the thing is, Jalen Hurts, just listen to this resume in the past 3 years. He's 36-20, including the playoffs. Only Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen have more wins in that span. He has the 4th most combined yards and touchdowns, I should say, for quarterbacks. He went toe-to-toe with the best quarterback in the league, outplaying him in a Super Bowl. That Super Bowl was the 2nd highest graded Super Bowl performance of any other quarterback outside of Nick Foles. Again, like I said, he was a top 2 MVP favorite for the majority of the last 2 years. I mean, he had a bad stretch, but Justin Herbert hasn't had a bad stretch. Kirk Cousins was in this list from the draft dudes, and so was Jared Goff. Jared Goff has had bad seasons multiple in a row. Dak Prescott hasn't choked in the playoffs every single year. Like, I know Jalen has some negatives, and there's definitely, like, I was on him more than anybody at the end of last year. But I don't know. I think his downs versus some of these other guys on this list, it's not nearly as bad, and his highs are way higher than a Dak Prescott, a Jared Goff, a Kirk Cousins.
So let's go to that 2022 season, right? Like, that's when he's rated the highest on that, let's say.
Yeah.
Has Kirk Cousins ever performed to that level?
No,
even
never.
with the best group of receivers and weapons that he's ever had.
No, he hasn't. And Gino, I'm sorry. I know you love Justin Herbert. I do too. I think he's a top 5, top 7 talented quarterback in the league. I know he's had a bad go of it.
He's just not there yet.
Right, and I know he's had a bad go of it in LA, not to remove, like, there's been so many injuries on both sides of the ball. You know, Staley was a terrible head coach, in my opinion. However, if Justin Herbert's supposed to be a top 5, top 7 guy, like he's been getting that reputation, a lot of times over Jalen Hurts, one playoff appearance to me isn't enough when there's 7 teams that make it. Like, I'm not saying, you know, with everything else that's been going wrong for Herbert there, that he should find a way to get them to be the 1 or 2 seed. But the fact that he, like, last year couldn't even get them to the 7, I don't know, like, that to me should not mean he is ahead of Jalen Hurts in these rankings. A lot of these guys, I don't know what the basis for why they got in over Jalen. Sometimes I think these lists are just people firing from the hip.
So let's look at the Kirk Cousins one in particular. And I think the CJ Stroud one to an extent. CJ Stroud, in my opinion, I think he's a top 12 guy. Right, I
was going to say, I could understand Stroud, like an ascending second-year player that won a playoff game, was elite last year. That I could almost get behind, but even so, I'd still put Jalen ahead of him.
And why I bring those guys up, and I could probably even throw a Jared Goff into the equation. If you do it from a scouting lens and you strip away the helmet, you strip away all the players around them, right? Yeah, you have to contextualize everything. But if you're talking about what that player is at the heart of what their film tells you and what their numbers tell you, who are you taking? Jared Goff, Kirk Cousins, or Jalen Hurts? CJ Stroud is the only one I might.
Sure.
But the reason you're putting them into that conversation is what they have around them. That has to be the reason why. And it has to be Kirk Cousins going into arguably the most loaded Atlanta team in years. Jared Goff coming off of a season which was the historically best season for the Detroit Lions ever when it comes to an offense. Jalen Hurts is performing at record pace when it comes to Eagles records, right? He's doing things that guys in the NFL haven't done. He's getting compared to Lamar Jackson when it comes to all-purpose things on the ground.
Cam Newton with rushing touchdowns.
When it comes to in-the-pocket numbers, Lou, people want to say he's just a running back. Go listen to the hundreds of shows we did last year preaching the numbers that he was.
PFF had him graded as the second highest passer last year for intermediate throws in between 10 and 19 yards. So again, and last year, even like that comeback stretch, he had 5 straight games where he came back down 10 plus points. That was the longest streak in the Super Bowl era. I'm not, again, look, like if you said that.
Give me the Buffalo second half and find tape of Kirk Cousins and Jared Goff doing what Jalen Hurts did. That's the ceiling. I want you to put it all in what the ceiling is right there. And that's the moment. That was his Heisman moment, and none of them have reached that caliber. The other guys you can make the case for.
Yes, I agree.
Justin Herbert, the rest of the pack.
Even I would disagree, but if they got deep into it, could make the case for a Jordan Love based on ascension. Depends on how you're ranking.
Supporting cast.
Jordan Love too.
Right
Jordan Love, Dak Prescott. It depends on how you are listing this, how you're making this ranking. The criteria is always just so open-ended that it's hard to argue, because it's like, what is your basis? Is it who you'd want right now? Is it based on past production? Is it based on the system?
And all-time greats were saying Aaron Rodgers.
I don't know.
On this list,
right, exactly.
So active quarterbacks.
That's what always confuses me about the list too. But if it's just based on who are the 10 best quarterbacks right now, based on what they're going to be and what they've done, I think, again, yes, I would not argue Jalen over Mahomes, over Josh Allen, Lamar. You could make the case for a Stroud and a Lawrence and a Love and a lot of those young players. But to say that he's not inside the top 10 would mean, again, a lot of guys that do not have the resume of him are getting pushed up, like a Cousins, a Goff. a Dak Prescott. I'm sorry. I know Dak led the league in passing last year, but you cannot be the historical playoff choker that he is and be put ahead of Jalen. Like, I cannot get behind that at all.
The Dak one, I kind of would put him in that same conversation.
And again, if you want to, and Dak has a good case. If you want to rank him like a spot or two ahead of Jalen, I'm not going to freak out. But Jalen is a top 10
I would say
quarterback.
that Dak has kind of elevated those passing
Sure.
a little bit more at times, in my opinion. And
Although he's had Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb the majority of his career, and then Des Bryant before that.
Now you're making some good counterpoints. Yeah. We can get into that.
But that's the other thing, Jay. Like, it's almost like people are like crapping on Jalen for having a good supporting cast, like saying he's a product of his system. But my counter to that is his system sucked last year, and he still elevated that team.
Exactly.
Like, yeah, his talent, like he has talent around him, of course, better talent than any Eagles quarterback ever. But let's not act like everything for Jalen's been perfect when it comes to coaching, defense. Like, it hasn't always been what it was in 2022.
And look at Detroit right now. I mean, you lose your offensive coordinator. You're going through the same cycle that we are talking about.
It's like different rules for each player. That's what I want to ask these people. That's why you
can't get too pent up.
But I will anyway.
For laughs and giggles here, let's just go through. Let's put just a rough parameter on it. 10 guys that if you had the ball in their hand right now, you believe are going to win you that football game when it matters.
Regardless of situation. Yeah, Jalen's absolutely in that list.
Let's go down.
All right, real quick. Mahomes is 1.
Yes.
I would say Allen's 2. That's
he's
in my
freak,
opinion.
Of course.
I think top 4, you can put in any order. Mahomes, Allen. I put Lamar 3, Burrow 4 when healthy.
Yeah, I can throw all of them in there as well. So when
I actually did my ranking, so I just
I was just going to throw like a rough 10. Like I really don't care what in particular order.
I couldn't help but I couldn't wait for the show, so I put my ranking out there.
Mahomes
1, Allen 2, Lamar 3, Burrow 4. I put Jalen 5. So I did say he's a top 5 quarterback. Stroud 6, Herbert 7, Lawrence 8, 9 Love, 10 Prescott. A lot of people are going to disagree with the Prescott one. The playoffs I can't get over.
I think you're going to get a lot of hate on the Purdy thing too.
That's fine. Purdy to me does not belong on the list over anybody I mentioned.
What
I think
were you last 5?
So bottom 5 was Stroud, Herbert, Lawrence, Love, Prescott. I think you put Trevor Lawrence in the San Francisco 49ers and they probably win a ring last year or within the last 3 years.
See that now we're changing the whole.
That's what I'm saying. The list is just so it's not black and white. So.
It's not black and white.
I did it based on what they're going. I tried to combine what they're going to be, like remove situation, like you said, take the logo off the helmet, what they're going to be and what they've done. Who do you want? It's not an easy thing to rank because there's so many different variables. There's so many. But
then you're talking about this and it's like there is an age bias in there as well.
Sure, yeah, because Aaron Rodgers is a little bit
younger. So
of course.
You kind of have to look at this.
But also, Aaron Rodgers hasn't played in 2 years and he hasn't really been that great in 3 years.
Oh, I wasn't even like talking.
No, I get it.
In this equation, if
sure.
we're being honest.
Okay, good.
Like, I don't think he's that situation is something different. Like, thank God we're not the New York media. But
no, God.
I would throw Dak Prescott in that older quarterback type of shit. Like he's been around, dude. Like him and Goff are like older quarterbacks. And like, let me throw this out there. Would you take Brock Purdy, Jared Goff, Dak Prescott, Kirk Cousins? You have to pick one. You're at the edge of a pirate ship. You have to give me an answer. I'm gonna set you. You have to.
Can I jump?
Yeah.
Did you put Dak in there?
Yes.
I would take Dak. Yeah. I don't love it. I'm going to hate every second
between
of it.
him and Purdy. Like, there are the moments of...
I might take Goff over Purdy.
No, dude.
No, actually, never mind. Purdy doesn't give enough credit for his off-script plays.
Like,
I agree.
He can like, go off script.
Yeah, I take that back.
He's a statue. Kirk is going to be
Kirk is dead last for me. 36-year-old with a torn Achilles. No thanks.
You get into the age discussion between Dak and the younger counterpart. I don't know, man. That's a tough one, But
Jalen belongs in the top 10.
Jalen
I put him at 5.
Undoubtedly. Like, we're having conversations about guys that we believe are like top 15 to 12 reaching into the top 10 conversation. But
yeah, man. I'm telling you, I think it's because of the finish. I think people just can't get those last few games out of their head because outside of that resume I listed off, how is that not a top 10 quarterback?
Like, where's Will Levis in your conversation? And like there's so many different variables.
Yeah, I totally agree. But Jalen Hurts is a top 10 quarterback. You heard it here right on the Locked On Eagles podcast. Coming up next, training camp is 1 week away. How many actual starting jobs are up for grabs? We'll get into it coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by BetterHelp Online Therapy. Look, I've learned this through therapy over the last 4 years. Comparison is certainly the thief of joy, and it's easy to envy other people's lives, especially when you go on social media, you see pictures from their trips, their jobs, everything. But in reality, they probably don't have everything figured out compared to you. Therapy can help you focus on what you want for your life instead of what others have, so you can start living your best life for you. If you want to get through everything about that, go to BetterHelp.com. Give online therapy a try. It's entirely online, like I said, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Make sure to visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today. You're going to get 10% off your first month of online therapy. Once again, that's BetterHelp.com/lockedon for 10% off your first month. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Guys, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Got to turn down the volume with all the shouting about Jalen Hurts not being in the top 10? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel, programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Training camp 1 week away for the Philadelphia Eagles. Can't believe that. I'm ready though, Gino. I got to get that sour taste of 2023 out of my mouth.
It's that smell you get every fall where it's like the heat, the extreme
I call it,
heat
it's
goes
fresh
away.
turf.
Yeah, and like
that's what I'm smelling.
The mornings are a little dewy on the ground.
Yep.
That's the feeling you need to
The
get
Jugs
back.
machine is out. I can't wait for ball, man. I mean, this team just looks so exciting. Again, there's been a lot of Eagles teams I've been excited for, but this one especially, I love it.
As much as I like to crap on the Buffalo Bills on this show, I never had the pleasure of getting down to go to the Eagles training camp back
At Lehigh. Yeah. I wish they still did it. It's something I never got to do either.
But one thing I did get to do was that in Rochester, New York, where they still hold their training camp at St. John Fisher, we would go every year. Me and my cousins, my aunt would take me. And, man, it was just those night practices would be so hot. And you're like, we got to get rid of this heat. The guys would just be in just helmets with skeletons on. And then the next thing you know, that was the closed door to summer. Fall's on its way. And we're going to be talking about the Eagles for 18 weeks in a row. And
I think my favorite thing.
Big things coming.
Yeah, like going to whatever NFL team was in your area, their training camp, if it was open to the public, was great. When Dave Spadaro used to do those like 5-6 hour long training camp live broadcasts on PhiladelphiaEagles.com, I mean, it would be a middle of July day and I'm a kid on summer vacation and I would be sitting there the entire time watching Leonard Weaver interviews and whatever the hell they were cooking up like a decade ago. But I think for this year with camp, like there's a lot to look forward to. There's a lot of depth battles to see new players on this team, like what the roles are going to be with new coaches. But when it comes to like actual battles for starting jobs, I think some people might disagree. But, Gino, I don't know if I think there's only one job that could legitimately go in many different directions. And even there's a favorite, and it's the right guard spot. I think Tyler Steen is the favorite right now. I think they want him to win that job. But I could see a scenario where Mekhi Becton does win it, where they see, holy crap, he has more power than any of these linemen. Imagine what we can do with him next to Lane Johnson in the run game, like having him there. And maybe they see Tyler Steen more as it's better suited for him to be a backup tackle to Lane and to Mailata, to have him be that swing guy, right? I think that's a scenario that could play out. They have Matt Hennessy, who has starting experience. They brought in Max Sharping, who has starting experience for multiple playoff teams. That's the only position, though, where I personally, again, you can make the case for other spots. That's the only one where I could see multiple guys having a case to be the starter.
So starter battles, you're saying?
Starter battles, because there's so many depth battles, of course. Yeah. But I think to who can start in 2024, I can only see it being right guard.
You don't think corner's even a conversation?
I personally don't. And that's what somebody tweeted at me immediately is like, there are so many good corners. You've said it a million times on the show. I'm like, they did not draft Quinyon Mitchell and preach all this stuff about letting your day one, your top investments play earlier and just to redshirt Quinyon again. Unless he looks significantly inferior to Isaiah Rodgers and Keely Ringo, I think they have to start him. I think it's more likely they trade Slay away to let one of those other guys play than to bench Mitchell.
That's insane.
I think Quinyon's playing.
That's an insane thing to say, dude.
I think Quinyon's playing.
So you think they're going to go into this season and just say, like, the last week of January, or not the last week of January, the last week of August, not knock on wood, that Teddy Bridgewater-like scenario doesn't happen, but a team's like, hey, I'm going to offer you this for Darius Slay and Howie Roseman.
I don't think it's going to happen. Yeah, no, I'm not betting on it. I'm saying it's more. I think it's more likely that would happen.
Yeah, I get
than Quinyon. And I'm not saying that they're just going to force Quinyon out there.
Though, like they're going to run tons of sub packages with
him
in there, and I think Isaiah Rodgers is probably going to be the guy to get the job right away. And it's not going to be the worst thing that if he is the starter right off the bat on the outside, that Quinyon, he doesn't have to get 40 snaps to be effective. If he could play 12 to 15 snaps in the first 4 to 6
So you think Rodgers is starting opposite Slay?
I think he's going to push Ringo. Cool. I think
he was really good at minicamp, it sounded like. So.
Being away from the field, hearing what he has to say, it really feels like he knows that this is the opportunity. Like that he got kind of gifted through a bad situation, like the good and the bad, that he's now in Philadelphia that presents the second cornerback opportunity because James Bradbury had such an abysmal season.
Yeah.
There isn't really a surefire answer there. And
I agree.
Keely Ringo, yeah, he showed flashes at the end of the season. Does he have to be more consistent? Does he have to continue to improve on the tackling like we had seen? Absolutely. But Isaiah Rodgers, what he did before his suspension, he was very good in the National Football League. Quinyon Mitchell, he's yet to do it at the NFL level. That's the only thing I'm kind of hesitant on. And especially cornerback, more than most positions, Lou, that's where that kind of development curve.
I get it. I would like to counter that, though.
For Tyler Steen, I kind of see that argument. I'm like, you're really going to sit him and Kai Becton, who's maybe a 1-year guy at bet. Like,
remember, Becton is a first-round talent. Like, I know they invested.
Sign here again. Like,
that's a fair point, but I will say for corner, number one, there have been a lot of guys that come into the league immediately and have success. Surtain, Horn, Sauce, Stingley. So I think Quinyon, Tariq Woolen, Devin Witherspoon, and I do get what you're saying. Like Isaiah Rodgers and Keely Ringo have been incredible. They're young in their own right and have ceiling and they've shown flashes at the NFL level like Quinyon hasn't. But Ringo's sample size is small. Rodgers, it was only a 12-game sample size in his own right. So it's not like they're proven 5-year players in the prime. And I think it's – and I'm not saying they're going to force Quinyon out there. I think he's genuinely going to be just as good as those guys. And it's going to be may the best man win, but his tiebreaker is that he's the first-round pick. So I'm with you. I'm not saying he's going to be substantially better than Rodgers and even Ringo in camp and maybe even some other – like Cooper DeJean, who knows. But I just think I don't think there's going to be a big enough gap to where you don't put out your first-round corner. But that's just me. Again, I think a lot of people agree with you where they could say early on, especially Vic Fangio, he probably doesn't think the same way I do. I'm thinking more like a GM. I think you might be right where Fangio's mindset is a little bit different.
I see Fangio saying, I'm going to work this kid in one way or another. I have no sure thing in the slot right now. I know that Isaiah Rodgers is now primarily an outside corner. He didn't really work in the slot at all during mini camp. And what are your slot options right now?
I just think the combo of Quinyon on the outside and DeJean on the inside is better than Rodgers on the outside and then forcing a non-slot.
Well, they're just not going to. There's going to be one guy that plays like a true secondary position, and that's where they stay. That's going to be Darius Slay. Like, he's going to be your number one outside corner. The rest of the guys, they're going to be rotating all over the field. Like, even that backside corner, who is going to be your number 2, he's going to have to be somebody who can be a reliable tackler. He's going to have to be somebody who at times sees the field like a safety a little bit. And I think that kind of lends to Quinyon Mitchell's ability. And can he play inside and out too? I think you give him every opportunity to do that. And Cooper DeJean as well.
Everything we're saying, and I think you could go on both sides. I think we're both making good cases. This whole conversation, though, with all this optionality they have, is exactly why I keep thinking, like you just made the case, like Slay's the one guy that we know what his role is going to be. But I'm like, does he deserve that over these other? Like, are we sure we want that? I'm not saying Slay is shot, but I just really am excited. Maybe I'm overdoing how good these young players could be.
If they go out and perform,
but what if they all just look incredible?
Yeah.
All four of them, DeJean, Ringo, Rodgers, and Quinyon, are just kicking ass until September. They might do that last second. I don't think they will, but
Team USA team thing this year with the basketball team where it's like everybody else just looks way
or it's
better.
Like we have to bench Anthony Edwards. Like we have to bench Cooper DeJean. How do we get all these guys on the field? Maybe
you want it to be the opposite. You want to be like, hey, LeBron's not going to be here for more than this Olympic, but Anthony Edwards is going to take us to 4 or 5 gold medals coming up. I get what you're saying,
but it's not that easy. Like LeBron is starting because there's more stuff that goes into it, and I think
that's the NFL, brother.
Yeah, man. This is exactly why I can't wait for camp. I can't wait to watch that battle, especially. But yeah, man, it's going to be great. 1 week away, Eagles training camp starts at the NovaCare Complex. Coming up next, right here on the Locked On Eagles, Eagles podcast, as we do every single Tuesday. What's more likely? I got another what's more likely question for Gino. It's got to do with the offensive and defensive side of the football. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
As training camp is right around the corner, I'm sure you're in the mood for football and you want to get your Eagles tickets. Well, folks, there's only one place I can guarantee you to go and get your tickets safely and without any worry in the world, and that is over at Game Time. And heck, in Philadelphia, it has the best setup downtown with all the sports stadiums right there. You want to grab some tickets for the Phils, for the Flyers, for the Sixers, for the Eagles, you can get that right on the Game Time app. You can get a panoramic view of your seat without even having to click into the ticket. They have last minute deals, even and up to an hour after the game starts. And right now, if you want to get in on this deal, and it's a pretty good deal for all first time customers on your first purchase, download the Game Time app, create an account and use the code LOCKDOWNNFL. $20 is going to come off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKDOWNNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
All right, Eagles fans, we're wrapping up this Tuesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Thanks so much for making us your first listen each and every day. It's time for What's More Likely, as it is every segment 3 of our Tuesday edition of the show. And, Gino, this one does have to do with a player that we talked about on the defensive side of the football and a player on offense. They're 2 new players, one from the draft, one from free agency, and it has to do with the end-of-the-year awards that don't have to really do with, who's going to win MVP, because that's only Jalen Hurts, right? So I have a question for you with What's More Likely. What is more likely at the end of the year for the NFL awards? Quinyon Mitchell wins Rookie of the Year, and I think might know where you're going with this based on our last conversation, but Quinyon wins Defensive Rookie of the Year, or Saquon Barkley wins Offensive Player of the Year.
So before I obviously give my answer to what I think a lot of people would pick, I'm going to go on the other side of the fence and say why I believe Quinyon Mitchell could win Defensive Rookie of the Year. That situation that I talked about in the last segment, saying that James Bradbury, well, he's not going to be that number 2 corner, more than likely. Well, Quinyon Mitchell could be presented a golden opportunity on a platter if he wins that job, right? Mm-hmm. And let's say he goes out there and he is responsible for the number 2 and he gets a ton of interceptions and he has, let's say, 4 interceptions, 2 forced fumbles, and he has 13, 14 pass breakups, and he looks on par with Darius Slay. How many other defensive players were drafted in the first round? There's not that many. It was offense heavy through and through.
Yeah, it was.
So you talk about the challengers to that title, there aren't many. But we're talking about Saquon freaking Barkley, somebody who performed in a dog water offense for the New York Jets. There's a reason they got out of that town, that he got out of that town. I mean, regardless of the conversations that happened behind closed doors, he knew why he wanted to come to Philadelphia. It was to play with A.J. Brown. It was to play with Devontae Smith. It was to play behind that offensive line, Lou. You know how great it would be if you were somebody that got punched in the face every single day, and then a bunch of big guys came in and were like, hey, we're going to protect you from getting punched in the face every single day. And we actually mean it. Yeah, I think Saquon's going to do a good job. And Kellen Moore, he is going to allow Saquon to prosper in this offense. And
yeah, you're making a good case for it. I think in a vacuum,
as good as
right.
AJ is, as good as Devontae is, it's like he can do everything. We talk about the multifaceted element. When you look at the all-purpose yards at the end of the year, yeah, AJ might have, say, 1,650 or 1,700 to challenge for like an offensive player of the year. But Saquon might have like 2,400 all-purpose yards if he has a crazy season where we're saying he is the offensive player of the year.
Yeah, he has more ways to eat than A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith.
And he has to surpass Christian McCaffrey, like these top-level players.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think, yeah, you could go back and forth. You made a really good case for why Saquon could be, but then you could also say, like, he has so much competition at running back, at wide receiver, that, and even on his own offense.
Playing field that he's going against.
And even on his own offense, he's got to compete with so many mouths to feed that I would say I would personally pick Quinyon because also you're looking at the NFL. Normally it's pass rushers that win that award, but lately you've seen like Sauce Gardner won it 2 years ago and Reek Woolen was the other finalist. You look at in the last decade, like it's either been corners or pass rushers, like Marshawn Lattimore won it. You go back to Marcus Peters, he won it. So they've had guys. I mean, it hasn't been a ton of players at this position, but there have been corners that win it. And you look at too, like maybe there is a role this year where Quinyon comes in and Slay's covering the top guy, but eventually they realize Mitchell's the better player and suddenly he's doing that halfway through the year. So I just, again, everybody knows I'm a huge Quinyon Mitchell guy. I think also you mentioned how there's just not many defensive players that went in the first round. It's not a great crop of defensive, like, I don't know, early.
What if you win the Defensive Player of the Year? What if
Cooper DeJean
wins it?
Why
can't he challenge for the throne?
No, he absolutely could. If he's your slot Swiss Army knife that has more turnovers than Quinyon Mitchell.
Like 100% of the snaps.
And what if he's returning kicks? Like he takes one to the house or one or two and he swings a game and they win? Yeah, I don't know.
I think that might have been
Okay, how about this?
What's more likely?
Hold on, what's more likely? Okay, Cooper DeJean and Quinyon Mitchell, so that field, one of them winning Rookie of the Year or the trio of Devontae, AJ, and Saquon.
Winning
and we'll say...
Ooh, this is a good one. This is like a handicap WWE.
Well, we got to give a third one to the Eagles, too. Well, no, because J-Lix Hunt's not
we'll go old
so.
school Attitude Era WWE.
We'll say Jeremiah Trotter's their third guy, just because it's got to be 3 on 3.
That would be a freak season if so.
Yeah. I would say DeJean and Mitchell.
Ooh, man,
there's just so many offensive
weapons in this class, which like is Dallas Turner going to blow it out of the water for?
Yeah, or a guy we're just not thinking of from day 3, like Reek Woolen was a finalist 2 years ago, and outside of me and you, nobody was.
Indy, I don't know.
Yeah. I'm going to go with the young corners.
I'm going to go with the offensive guys. I like the back and forth. You ride with the defensive secondary. I'll ride with the way this team is going to win on offense.
I think your players have a better chance of being award worthy. I think the field that Quinyon and DeJean, the competition they have, is they have a better path, but you have the better players that are more probably worthy of the award. Right,
we are at a roulette table right now.
Mm-hmm.
The guys that the offensive players we're talking about, those are the numbers. Those are the 35-1 payouts.
Yeah.
Like it's not as likely because there are more of them, but if you hit winner, chicken dinner, you did a great job. But DeJean and Mitchell, that's like betting on the number or the colors on the outside. It's like, yeah, you still might win it. There's a lower field, like you better odds, and hey, at the end of the day, you won something. So I think all of us would be happy if we walked away from that roulette table with a winner in either of these two categories.
For sure. All right, that's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Got 3 more for you this week as we get you ready for training camp starting up next week at the NovaCare Complex. Thanks so much for making us your first listen each and every day. For Gino Camilleri, I'm Lou DiBiase signing off. As always, thanks so much for downloading, watching, and listening. And let's go Birds.
Fly, Eagles, fly.